new pandemic, gripped by a new virus called COVID-19, a virus that has killed thousands already. The new coronavirus started in the Chinese city of Wuhan, and similar to the SARS virus from 2003, is strongly thought to have originated from a meat market, where wild animals are also traded. It is therefore a zoonotic disease, meaning that it is a disease that is spread from non-human animals to humans. Consequently, many people are now blaming Chinese culture for this new pandemic, outraged that people in China eat animals such as bats and pangolins. However, outbreaks of zoonotic diseases have happened before in many places around the world. And so, is there a bigger issue at play here? Now, undeniably, the trading of wild animals and poor regulations and standards for trading animals increases the likelihood of zoonotic diseases occurring. But to understand whether or not something like this could happen again, or anywhere else in the world, we need to look to the past and see the origins of other zoonotic diseases. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns that 3 out of 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. And the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and World Organization for Animal Health have previously stated that increased demand for animal protein is one of the main risk factors of a pandemic. According to the AIDS Institute, the HIV virus started because of humans eating chimpanzees, and according to the BBC, the recent Ebola outbreak started because of people eating bats. Furthermore, BSE started in the UK because farmers were feeding dead cattle back to cattle, forcing them to cannibalize.
In 1996, the government announced that BSE had jumped to humans.
The unit has identified a previously unrecognized and consistent disease pattern.
And the genetic lineage of the swine flu pandemic was traced back to a pig farm in the US. The one thing that all of these diseases have in common is that they are linked to our exploitation of non-human animals. In a similar way, because COVID-19 is strongly believed to have started in a meat market, the virus was passed to humans in an environment that only existed because of our desire to eat animals. Zoonotic diseases can be created in any country, and regardless of the country they originate from, our exploitation of animals increases the risk of these diseases emerging. COVID-19 is just the latest in a long history of deadly diseases, many of which have been exacerbated because of what we do to animals, and most likely, it will not be the last. And what awaits us in the future could potentially be even more deadly and destructive. It's easy for us to blame China for what is happening because it removes accountability from our own actions. But there have been extreme cases of xenophobia where people who appear Asian have been assaulted simply for the way that they look.
When I looked over, there was someone filming me. It was just coronavirus being repeatedly shouted at me. He punched me twice. The first time he missed, the second time he got me right in between the eyes, and it hit my glasses. My glasses flew off, and my glasses broke my nose as well.
Speaking of the virus, police say it may have played a role in this attack. Commenters on Twitter say he even called the woman diseased.
Every disease has ever came from China, homie. Everything comes from China. It's disgusting.
Yet as history shows us, the problem isn't country-specific or culturally specific. And so, if you're stockpiling toilet roll, perhaps it's important to look at what else is in your shopping trolley. Or if you disagree with people eating bats, then the question is, what is the difference between eating bats or eating pigs or chickens? Especially if all 3 animals are capable of spreading zoonotic diseases. Some zoonotic diseases we can do very little to stop or avoid, but surely that provides us with even more of a reason for us to change our behaviours in order to stop the ones that we can avoid, especially when those ones have historically been among the most pernicious, severe, and destructive of all. How can we claim that exploiting animals is a personal choice when doing so not only kills trillions of non-human animals, but in turn increases our risk of pandemics? How can we point the finger at others for the actions of problems that we are also responsible for causing? If COVID-19 can teach us anything, it must be that in the blink of an eye, everything can change. And we must ensure that when it dissipates, we do not go back to business as usual. As long as we exploit others, we increase our risk of these things happening again. How many more have to die? How many more viruses does there need to be How many more need to suffer? And at what point does enough become enough? As we all find ourselves united under the same global crisis, on opposite sides of the world, but dealing with the same threat, can we use this time to reflect on our actions, how we've consumed, how we've lived, how we've eaten? The whole world is coming together during this crisis. People are showing how much strength we all have together in unity. People singing from their balconies, isolated, but not alone. It is times like these where we see the beauty of our species and the interconnectedness of all life. We share this planet together as a species, but also among others as well. Let us use this crisis to learn from our mistakes. Let us learn to treat everyone who lives here with respect, and to also respect the planet itself. We may not be able to end all suffering or all pandemics, but we can come together to end those that are caused by our exploitation of others.
Okay, so this morning I read from one of my books, Conversations Between a Philosopher and a Saint. So the saint is Srila Prabhupada. Huh? Hare Krishna. The saint is Srila Prabhupada and the philosopher is Socrates. Anyway, in the beginning, I say, without a correct and comprehensive understanding of the purpose of life in this world, man cannot plan how to have a successful life. With wrong answers, man is forced to suffer helplessly by violating the laws of nature due to ignorance. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that sheds light on this question. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Bhagavad Gita 13:21. Chapter 13, verse 21. According to Vedic philosophy, living entities and material nature are both eternal or without beginning and without end. The living entities are eternal souls with individuality and limited free will. Their free will is limited to either accepting or rejecting God's instructions. Depending on which way they decide, there are consequences. By accepting God's instructions as the guiding principles of life, one gradually becomes free from the influence of the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, that condition us to be attached to the temporary body and its temporary pleasures and pains. By rejecting God's instructions, one becomes entangled by the reactions to activities that breach natural laws. Possible consequences of such errant behavior are natural cataclysms, body ailments, trouble caused by other living beings, and repeated birth and death in an endless cycle. The cycle is endless because the soul is eternal. The soul can be eternally liberated or eternally chained to a cycle of repeated birth and death. The only redeeming possibility is that at any time, an eternally conditioned soul, suffering in this world of illusion, can choose to surrender to the will of God. Then his or her destiny is changed, and they can free themselves from the cycle of birth and death. So that was the introduction. And then I explained the four regulative principles that are followed when one engages in Sanatana Dharma or eternal duty and obligation toward God, and that is 4 things that one should avoid and 4 things that one should do. So those are: avoid meat eating, including red meat, chicken, fish, etc., and avoid illicit sex outside of marriage, and in marriage engage in sex only for procreation. And number 3, gambling and or philosophical speculation. And number 4, intoxication, including coffee and tea. So, and those are the things to avoid, and the things to do is read and discuss holy scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and other Vedas in the company of enlightened devotees. Eat only sanctified vegetarian foods that have been offered first to God or Krishna. Chant and meditate on Krishna's names, holy mantras like Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And number 4, volunteer for service in the temple or house of God in the association of holy devotees. Okay, so, and additionally, the Vedas recommend 9 favorable activities to develop spiritual consciousness. Daily hearing, chanting, and remembering the glories of God, serving, praying, worshiping, becoming the servant of the Lord, making friendship with, and surrendering everything to God. So all of these principles will cause one to develop spiritual consciousness, which means that one acts with the knowledge that God is the supreme controller and proprietor of nature, and that God has a plan how the living entities can live in this world happily and at last attain liberation from the suffering of birth, old age, disease, and death. So after that, I explained God's plan that's revealed in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, 10th verse, Sahayagya Prajasristva Puravacha Prajapati Ananya Parsavisvadvam Esavos Sistakamaduk, which says that in the beginning of creation, the Lord of creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Krishna, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy with this yajna, or sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." So this is the plan of God for us. How did we come to the material world? Well, we have limited free will, and we chose to separate ourselves from God voluntarily in order to dominate and control material nature, or at least a part of it. And that is virtually impossible, as we've explained previously. Krishna says, Daivihi esa gunamaya mama maya duratyaya. He says that mamevi pupadyante maya metam tarantite. He says that this Daivi maya, or this material energy, is impossible to overcome. But one who surrenders unto me can easily overcome it. So the material nature, meaning the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, control the activities of people. We think that we're independent, but as long as we're acting for sense gratification and for self-indulgence, we become conditioned by these modes, and we're being forced to do things. Although we may think that we're independent, we're not. So, and then ultimately we're forced to be born, we're forced to get old, to get sick, and to die. So, therefore, Krishna explains that the Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform sacrifices for the satisfaction of Krishna, of Vishnu or Krishna, so that while in the material world they can live very comfortably without anxiety, and after finishing the present material body they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole program for the conditioned soul. By performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually become Krishna conscious and become godly in all respects. In the age of Kali, the Sankirtan Yajna, the chanting of the holy names of God, is recommended by the Vedic scriptures, and this transcendental system was introduced by Lord Chaitanya for the deliverance of all men in this age. Sankirtan Yajna, or sacrifice, the congregational chanting of the holy names of the Lord, and Krishna consciousness go well together. Lord Krishna in his devotional form as Lord Chaitanya is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this age of Kali, age of hypocrisy and quarrel, people who are endowed with sufficient intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performance of Sankirtan Yajna. Other yajnas prescribed in the Vedic literatures are not easy to perform in this age of Kali, but the Sankirtan Yajna is easy and sublime for all purposes, as recommended in Bhagavad Gita. So, Jai Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. if the solution to all problems is so straightforward and easy, why is it that people don't do it? Well, this is what I'm going to discuss today. I discussed a lot more things this morning, but you can see the video if you want. But this particular question is very interesting. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7, verse number 6, it says, "The material miseries of the living entity which are superfluous to him can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature which is in relation to the supreme truth." So the problem is people don't believe scriptural evidence. They believe so many other things, but not the scriptures. Now, why is that? It's basically due to the educational system. And we're going to get into that in much more detail. But before that, I want to read something that Srila Prabhupada has written that is revealing. And he says in the first canto, chapter 5, and verse number 4 and 5. I think. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay, 1 second. I'm not finding the verse that I was looking for. Okay. So, the root cause of suffering by the materialistic living beings is pointed out with remedial measures which are to be undertaken and also the ultimate perfection to be gained. All this is mentioned in this particular verse. The living being is by constitution transcendental to material engagement, but he is now imprisoned by the external energy, and therefore he thinks himself one of the material products. In other words, today, due to modern education, people think that we are a product of matter. And to support this, they say that the world started with a big bang. There was no intelligence or intelligent or super being behind it. And by force of gravity and other natural forces, things began to combine, matter began to combine, and through chemical evolution, etc. And then somehow or other, people appeared, and different species have appeared through the process of Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest, and in modern Darwinism, genetic mutation, etc. And this is the origin of the world. There's no God behind it. There's no intelligence behind it. It's all become possible by infinite number of permutations and combinations. And therefore, when a person dies, there's nothing. After death, there's nothing. And therefore, there's no superior authority that we're going to be by whom we're going to be judged, and therefore we should concentrate on living life to its fullest now, and enjoy as much as we can different types of sense gratifications that are present in this world. So this is the atheistic point of view that is espoused by humanism. Humanism is the philosophy that there is no God, and mankind has to rely only on science, reason, and logic to determine what is truth. So this is taught to our children, along with Darwinism, and along with the Big Bang Theory, and later on with Freudian psychology, and so forth. And being indoctrinated like that from kindergarten to graduating college, most people become atheists nowadays, whether it's in India or the United States. So here Prabhupada is saying that the living being by constitution is transcendental to material engagement, but he is now imprisoned by the external energy, and therefore he thinks himself one of the material products. So that is the humanistic idea, that we are only a product of material combination. And due to this unholy contact, the pure spiritual entity suffers material miseries under the modes of material nature. In other words, our soul, which is represented by the consciousness in the body, identifies with the body and becomes in other words, suffers. Whatever happens to the body causes us to suffer. Whereas if we identify with the eternal soul, then we can tolerate the different incidental sufferings of the body, but most of those sufferings will not happen if one leads a life based on following the regulative principles of Krishna consciousness, the 4 don'ts and the 4 do's. But there are always going to be some suffering in life because we have a very let's say a material body that's subject to old age, disease, and death. But we learn to tolerate those things by cultivating spiritual knowledge and spiritual practices. So now another aspect of this misinformation is the economy. And on that subject, Srila Prabhupada says, the basic principle of economic development is centered on land and cows. The necessities of human society are food grains, fruits, milk, minerals, clothing, wood, etc. One requires all these items to fulfill the material needs of the body. Certainly one does not require flesh and fish or iron tools and machinery. During the regime of Maharaj Yudhisthira, that's 5,000 years ago, all over the world there were regulated rainfalls. Rainfalls are not in the control of the human being. The heavenly king Indradeva is the controller of rains, and he is the servant of Lord Krishna. When the Lord is obeyed by the king and the people under the king's administration, there are regulated rains from the horizon, and these rains are the causes of all varieties of production on the land. Not only do regulated rains help ample production of grains and fruits, but when they combine with astronomical influences, there is ample production of valuable stones and pearls. Grains and vegetables can sumptuously feed a man and animals, and a fatty cow delivers enough milk to supply a man sumptuously with vigor and vitality. If there is enough milk, enough grains, enough fruit, enough cotton, enough silk, and enough jewels, then why do the people need cinemas, houses of prostitution, and slaughterhouses, etc.? What is the need of an artificial, luxurious life of cinema, cars, radio, flesh, and hotels? Has this civilization produced anything but quarreling individually and nationally? Has this civilization enhanced the cause of equality and fraternity by sending thousands of men into a hellish factory and the war fields at the whims of a particular man? It is said here that the cows previously moistened the pasturing land with milk because their milk bags were fatty and the animals were joyful. Do they not require, therefore, proper protection for a joyful life by being fed with a sufficient quantity of grass in the field? Why should men kill cows for their selfish purposes? Why should man not be satisfied with grains, fruits, and milk, which combined together can produce hundreds and thousands of palatable dishes? Why are there slaughterhouses all over the world to kill innocent animals? Maharaj Parikshit, grandson of Maharaj Yudhisthira, while touring his vast kingdom, saw a black man attempting to kill a cow. The king at once arrested the butcher and chastised him sufficiently. Should not a king or executive head protect the lives of the poor animals who are unable to defend themselves? Is this humanity? Are not the animals of a country citizens also? Then why are they allowed to be butchered in organized slaughterhouses? Are these the signs of equality, fraternity, and nonviolence? So, now we see why we looked at the video tonight and this morning. Because it shows that these terrible pandemics, like in 1918, and then there's the pig swine disease, and the chicken disease, and then now the corona, and then before that SARS corona disease, and some of them are terrible pandemics that go all over the world and kill thousands, hundreds and thousands of people. It's because of modern industrial treatment of animals in slaughterhouses, and also industrial agriculture, and using fertilizers, pesticides, etc. And so these are unnatural things. People did not live like this for millions of years on this earth. They lived a much more natural life in harmony with the laws of God and nature, and living more or less in harmony with the animals. Not building factories like in a chicken factory. There can be millions of chickens in very confined conditions, and therefore their diseases proliferate and mutate, and eventually they can jump from the animal, like a chicken or a pig, to a human being. And human beings don't have the same immune system as chickens and pigs and the bats and etc. And so it becomes very dangerous, as we're seeing right now, where one virus can paralyze all the major economies in the world. It's an unbelievable, let's say, feat that even an army cannot do. No, the Chinese army could not do that. The American army can't do it, but a virus can do it. Therefore, in contrast with modern, advanced, civilized form of government, an autocracy like Maharaj Yudhisthira's is by far superior to a so-called democracy in which animals are killed and a man less than an animal is allowed to cast votes for another less than animal man. We are all creatures of material nature. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that the Lord himself is the seed-giving father, and material nature is the mother of all living beings in all shapes. Thus, Mother Nature has enough foodstuff both for animals and for men, by the grace of the Father Almighty, Shri Krishna. The human being is the elder brother of all other living beings. He is endowed with intelligence more powerful than animals for realizing the course of nature and the indications of the Almighty Father. Human civilizations should depend on the production of material nature without artificially attempting economic development to turn the world into a chaos of artificial greed and power only for the purpose of artificial luxuries and sense gratification. This is but the life of dogs and hogs. So, in another interesting So there's 2 points here. Today I want to emphasize the question of modern education, which is the driving force of ignorance in this world. And I've written another little book called Srila Prabhupada's Instructions on Education. And in this booklet, it explains what Prabhupada foresaw as ideal education for children. He says, I have seen intelligent boys. They go to school, and the boy is spoiled. Simply slaughterhouse. This so-called school is called slaughterhouse. Yes, slaughterhouse. The modern educational system without any knowledge of Bhagavan, I may tell you frankly, not only in India, everywhere, they are practically slaughterhouse. Srila Prabhupada, and this is something I write, Srila Prabhupada discouraged materialistic education in the following conversation with a female disciple. You are saying that the children should learn these 3, geography and these things, and I want to know if they should also learn what they call biology, that is how the body is working, what are the bones and the blood, and Prabhupada. Simply waste of time. Simply waste of time. But this biology and that logy, they are useless. There is no necessity. You follow that. Brahmachari Gurukula. That I've already explained. That should be done. Don't bring any new thing, imported ideas. That will not be helpful. It will be encumbrance. Biologists, chemists, physicists, and mathematicians, there are hundreds and thousands. We are not going to waste our time in our school. Our school should produce a great, our school should not produce a great grammarian, a great geologist, a biologist. We don't want that. There are many other educational institutions for that. So then I write, Srila Prabhupada was adamant that Gurukulas, spiritual schools, were specifically meant to train Krishna-conscious children rather than persons qualified in material knowledge. Prabhupada, of course, we are going to open a Gurukula. Our aim is not how to make the students a big grammarian. No, that is not our purpose. How to make him fully Krishna-conscious. That is the aim of this Gurukula. In the Gurukula description, there is nothing such thing as how to make the student a big grammarian or etc. There is no question of economic problem. That one has to become learned to get service in some big school or college and get some big salary. This is not our aim. Our only aim is how to mold the life of the children to become Krishna conscious. Then, Prabhupada also explains how material education may be used in the service of Lord Krishna. The following verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam summarizes the purpose of spiritual education. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.29. Learned circles have positively concluded that the infallible purpose of the advancement of knowledge, namely austerities, study of the Vedas, sacrifice, chanting of hymns, charity, culminates in the transcendental descriptions of the Lord who is defined in choice poetry. Then I write, human intellect should be engaged in acquiring knowledge for the purpose of expertly using all material facilities for serving, understanding, and glorifying Lord Krishna. The study of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam with the above purpose in mind helps the devotee to live a spiritual life in this material world without being conditioned by the modes of nature and the ignorance that ensues. Serious following of Vedic knowledge, especially practicing what Lord Krishna has taught Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, will help all people attain the perfection of life, leading to elevation to the spiritual world. Lord Krishna explains that he is the goal of all knowledge. Vedaischa sarvir aham eva vedyo. Such knowledge is attained through performance of devotional service offered with love and meant uniquely for the pleasure of Lord Krishna. Okay, so now we see this is a different let's say, theory of education. The idea is that unless a person is trained to have faith in God and to live a simple life, not trying to exploit nature, but to use the facilities of nature to glorify God. So, therefore, Srila Prabhupada has written a very nice letter. He says, the community in which Krishna preferred to belong was Vaishya, farm community, because Nanda Maharaja, Krishna's father, happened to be a Vaishya king or landholder, and his main business was cow protection. It is understood that he had 900,000 cows, and Krishna and Balarama, Krishna's brother, used to take charge of them along with his many cowherd boyfriends. And every day in the morning he used to go out with his friends and the cows into the pasturing grounds. So if you seriously want to convert this new spot in New Vrindavan, which is in West Virginia, I shall advise you not to make it very much modernized. But as you are American boys, you must make it just suitable to your minimum needs, not to make it too much luxurious, as generally Europeans and Americans are accustomed. Better to live there without modern amenities, but to live a natural, healthy life for executing Krishna consciousness. It may be an ideal village where the residents will have plain living and high thinking. For plain living, we must have sufficient land for raising crops and pasturing grounds for the cows. If there is sufficient grains and production of milk, then the whole economic problem is solved. You do not require any machines, cinema, hotels, slaughterhouses, brothels, nightclubs, all these modern amenities. People, in the spell of Maya, are trying to squeeze out gross pleasure from the senses, which is not possible to derive to our heart's content. Therefore, we are confused and baffled in our attempt to derive eternal pleasure from gross matter. Actually, joyful life is on the spiritual platform. Therefore, we should try to save our valuable time from material activities and engage them for Krishna consciousness. But at the same time, because we have to keep our body and soul together to execute our mission, we must have sufficient, not extravagant, food to eat, and that will be supplied by grains, fruits, and milk. If you can develop this place to that ideal life, and the residents become ideal Krishna conscious men and women in that part of your country, I think not only many philosophically minded people will be attracted, but they will be benefited also. The difficulty is that the people in this country, they want to continue their practice of sense gratification, and at the same time, they want to become transcendentally advanced. This is quite contradictory. One can advance in transcendental life by process of negating general practice of materialistic life. The exact adjustment is in Vaishnava philosophy, which is called Yukta Vairagya. Means that we should simply accept the bare necessities of our material part of life and try to save time for spiritual advancement. This should be the motto of New Vrindavan, if you at all develop it to the perfectional stage. And I am always at your service to help you by practical suggestion and assistance also. So here we see Prabhupada's vision. Return to basically farming communities, small villages, cooperative living, and developing spiritually so that there's a cooperation between man and God, God who's the leader of all the devatas or universal directors of the sun, rain, wind, water, etc. Then if Krishna is pleased, then he orders the devas to cooperate with human beings. And now this cooperation between the devas and the human beings means that there will be natural prosperity, simplicity, a simple living, and then time for spiritual life, and plenty of healthy, wholesome food to eat. And the land will be plentiful. There will always be a plentiful bounty of fruits, vegetables, grains, and lentils. And there'll be sufficient rain and sun and regular changing of the seasons, etc. There's a background arrangement to everything that's happening in the universe, just like there's a background arrangement in every city or town. There's a mayor, there's a fire department, there's a health department, and there are all kinds of people working to make sure that the basic needs are supplied to the people in that town or city. In the same way, there's an organization in the universe, and because of that organization, things are going on in a predictable way. To think that the universe is acting without any intelligent persons behind it is absurd. It's just like assuming that there's no intelligent persons behind Microsoft or Amazon or the city of Seattle or the United States, etc. Those are absurd ideas of ignorant people. There's a big organization behind all the universal things that are taking place on which we depend for our life. So, returning back, so the general theme of the video we saw was that this modern agriculture, and especially modern husbandry, taking care of animals, has become toxic. And here's a natural pandemic emergency in which many people are dying. I mean, many people are getting sick. And even though the United States has the strongest army in the world, China has this tremendous strong army, they can't stop the pandemic. See? And one disease goes away, another one comes. It's all because of not only the unholy diet, but unholy behavior of the people. As soon as piety, faith in God, regulated lifestyles, vegetarian diet, and depending on natural opulence rather than industrial goods, all of a sudden everything changes. And people will live prosperously, meaning they'll live at home without any debt, and they have a simple life and a healthy life, and they'll have time for spiritual life and developing character and holy nature. And that way, there's cooperation between man and God. And at the end of life, one goes back to the spiritual world. So we want to discuss this much more in detail, the economic part, the social organization part, or societal organization part, and the actual principles of what we call the universal principles of spirituality: mercy, truthfulness, cleanliness, and austerity. Those are the four universal principles of all spirituality. And that should be understood because those are the qualities that people have to develop in order to live peacefully in this world. So this morning also we discussed the Manu Samhita about the restrictions on meat eating and the dire results of not following those restrictions. So for example, I'll just read one. It says, this Manu Samhita, 5th chapter, 50th verse, he who, disregarding Rule 27, given above, Rule 27 says, anyway, we'll come back to that. He who disregards Rule 27 does not eat meat like a pisacha, meaning an eater of raw flesh, becomes dear to men and will not be tormented by diseases. So, today we have pisachas, or people who eat raw flesh, as we saw in that film. They might cook it also, but they're eating horrible things like bats and snakes and lizards and what was the name? Pangola? Yeah, it looks like a little dinosaur. And these are horrible things. They have their own immune system, they have their own diseases, but when we start eating them, then those, and we have a different immune system, you can pass on the sickness of the animal to human beings who do not have the ability to fight the disease, the virus, or the bacteria, etc. So here it says that when people eat, it says, verse 49, having well considered the disgusting origin of flesh and the cruelty of fettering and slaying corporeal beings, meaning animals, let him entirely abstain from eating flesh. So this was written over 5,000 years ago by Manu, the lawgiver of Vedic society. So we can see, it says also in verse 48, meat can never be obtained without injury to living creatures, and injury to sentient beings is detrimental to the attainment of heavenly bliss. Let him therefore shun the use of meat. So, we should understand that this meat eating, and especially eating what's called exotic meats, like they sell in the wet markets. Wet markets means they slaughter the animal in front of your eyes, and they give you the flesh, and then you can take it home and eat it. That is barbaric. It's unhygienic, and it is a breeding ground for all kinds of viruses and sicknesses. Okay, so we'll stop right there for tonight and continue again tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. We're going to have 1 week of discussion of coming back to a sane civilization based on Vedic principles and avoiding all detrimental things such as meat eating, illicit sex, gambling, speculation, intoxication, lust, anger, greed, envy, madness, and illusion. The Vedic culture has an ideal way of living. It's based on simple living, high thinking, and we're going to go deep into this subject so that we can understand what direction civilization should take now after this terrible pandemic that has paralyzed everything. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Okay, 7:30 tomorrow evening. Yeah, and this tomorrow morning, of course, 6:15. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Are there any questions? No, evening. We have morning class 6:15. Yes, every morning. That's also televised.